It's another wonderful time again from this side. We're saying hi to you and we hope you're having a good time with our channel. Today, we'll be looking into design. Design can be inspired by anything around you. It could be also circumstances that leads to that. Don't forget to click on the like button and also subscribe to this channel for more updates if you've gotten value from this very channel to help us do more, and also leave your comments on the comment section. This design was inspired by one of my students who is learning material combination. The internet, they say, is your friend. So how can we salvage the situation? We got a design from the internet and we say let us replicate this design that will fit in our material to solve the problem ahead of us. I don't own the copyright of this very product, but want to design something unique and different from theirs. The design we got was a design made with a Goodyear welted design, but ours want to use the method which is the most contemporary method that we know, that is the cemented methods. Now analyze the design and see how we can get our patterns exact. The aim is to have a whole apron carrying shoelaces and a counter. This is one of the most simplest design ever. Sometimes because of how beautiful a design looks like, we get carried away thinking that the design is complicated. This one is very simple. As a designer, you don't jump into conclusion on a particular design. You need to take time to analyze what the design is all about. Compare the design with other products around it, then figure a way how to get the patterns. What we're doing here is just to understand the spacing that will be given for our patterns, how the counter will look like, how the apron will look like, the tongue will look like. We have to put all these things into consideration. Then we take measurements to make sure that everything is put in place accordingly. Now we've taken measurement from our back height to make sure our pattern is all right. Take our git point. We're measuring the length of the apron to have an equal length from both sides. That's both the in and the outer part of the pattern. So we now go ahead to take measurement of our last, get the git point, get the back height, as well as our top line. Now we've taken the measurement for the top line. We're also checking the measurement for the apron, which will fit in accordingly. After taking all this measurement, we now go ahead and design our patterns. The pattern cutting process can be so unique in different ways. You can design your patterns on your last direct, or you can just take the dimensions, then go ahead and place it on a paper, getting your mint form before you design your patterns. But what we're doing here is more of a teachable class where we have to define all the differences and put them together so that we can have the dimensions on the last completely accurately. Then we'll now move ahead to do them on our paper. This is the process I chose to use, which is design on the last before taking it down to our paper, then do the finishing touches of our design. Now we've taken the measurement for the apron. You are designing the apron on the last and the quarters on the last. The apron is a complete long apron that goes from the instep down to the toe pad. Now let's take it down to get our standard. From our design, we now re-outline to make it more visible, so we'll have a full view of our design. Also, not forget, from the center line we have a 3mm space in between the center line to have our opening for shoelacing. Cut the masking tape and place it on the paper where we finish our design. Also, cut the feather edge by either you smudge it with your abrasive or sandpaper, or you cut through using your cutting knife or your cutters to remove the excess parts of the masking tape. Place it on a paper and continue with our design. I want you to note that this very method of taping the last on the outer part might not give you the exact measurement of what you're working on. That was why earlier I have to take my time to take some measurement during the design process. That's when I was interpreting the design on the last to get the actual measurement. So be very conscious of that. The ideal way is for you to create a mean form, that's from both the inner part and the outer part of your pattern before you start your pattern design to have accuracy. But in this case, most time I only use one side. Using that is because I know what I'm doing. It's an improvisation and it gives me the result because I can be able to manipulate easily. But if you are just a beginner, you have to be very careful when doing that. Now that we're done with removing the tape last, we straight the van point and also straight the instep line so that we'll have a very good flat line that we'll use to remove the next step of our patterns. We'll measure the 33mm for our tongue and also a small distance of about 1 inch away for the front part of the tongue, because a tongue is going to be a separate tongue where we'll create our curve on the pattern also. Now after that, we'll now go into perforation of our pattern. The standard pattern carries all the required patterns that you need. Now we've just taken the measurement for our lining patterns, that is 40mm on the top and 60mm on the bottom. We'll connect it with a straight line as it was shown earlier. And also now we're adding the lasting allowance on the bottom part, which I earlier said we should leave a space for that. So we'll now connect those lines together. All is 20mm, but it's a standard measurement also that you can use as well. But for the sake of saving time and also avoiding too much errors, we use a general measurement of 20mm. If you follow some principles, you discover that some parts you will have 20mm, some will have 18, some you have 16mm, either front part, back part and middle part. But for the sake of general method, we have a whole 20mm. The eyelet holes were also measured because we are having 5 eyelet holes, where I take some measurements here. But don't worry, with time, as you follow this very channel, I'm going to show you how you can get your eyelet hole distance. It's very simple mathematical calculation, very simple. I bet you just keep following this very channel. I will be giving us some tips on how to get some of these things as we do our patterns. Well, for the sake of this very project, that was not the focus. The focus is us getting an ideal design that will be able to match a very good combination of an embossed material, as the case may be. So we now perfect our materials. Anywhere you see a curve, just you cut through to have an opening where a pen can pass through or a pencil can pass through, so that you trace them out. Notice how I perfect this very material. Anytime I cut through the material, I create a small notch at the edges. Why I do those notches is to mark the bad side of my patterns and to also know my good part of the pattern. Where I have a good straight line that I will be using is where I allow it to be smooth, while the other parts I create a small notch like an arrow to indicate that that is a bad side that I'll be using, so I will not be able to use that side when tracing the original patterns. So, having done with our perforation, it's time to remove our whole pattern. As I told you, the patterns are very simple. It's not something very difficult. It's just something unique. Sometimes we get carried away by design and we think patterns will be very difficult. Now, since we have the pattern, we just need one part of it as our quarter. Now we trace the quarter out. Connect the splitted lines to give you the shape of your quarter. Don't forget, our quarter is going to be carrying a 5mm allowance. That's for the working allowance. You can leave it raw edge, you can add 5mm depending on how the design is going to look like. Based on our design, it will be carrying a 5mm allowance for folding. That's now cut through the quarter. Remember, the quarter is not carrying the apron. The apron is a separate part of the patterns. Now cut through and we'll now do that of our apron as well. Now that we're done with the quarter, we can now go forward to continue with the apron. The apron is also a complete apron from the instep down to the toe. So we'll now have to add an extra allowance for overlapping. That's an underlay allowance of 10mm where the cutter will rest on it. Place the standard on the horizontal surface of the paper we folded. Then we now trace the apron. Remember, what we traced earlier was the cutter. Now this is the apron. We will now trace it carefully. After reaching the van point, that's now where we now spring it to trace the other part towards the instep. Now press and spring carefully until it reaches the horizontal surface again of the instep. Remember, we have two angles: the line that is drawn towards the vamp and the line from the vamp to the instep. That will be giving us an angle. These are the two cardinal points you should notice. Trace the first one on the horizontal surface from the vamp and spring it until you have another straight line from the instep upward to be a horizontal surface again. Then trace the remaining parts of the line, then join them together. Now our apron will be carrying an underlay allowance of 10 mm where the cutter will be resting on before we stitch them together. So right now I'm adding 10 mm beneath an underlay allowance on the apron. The purpose is to have an allowance where the cutter will be resting. So we'll perfect the line of the apron, then we now add the 10 mm allowance. Right away, we're also going to create the lining pattern. The first pattern we just created is what we call the net pattern. That's the first pattern that we'll do create before doing any other work. That's always the first pattern that has no extra allowances for folding or allowances for lining. Ideally, we'll have an allowance for lining, we'll have allowance for folding. And the underlay allowance is a general allowance that always fall in every pattern. As far as there will be an underlay, you must create that underlay allowance. Right about now, let us create the pattern for the back strap. That's the back strap that will holding the cutters together. Now use the back strap. Rather, is going to look like a counter because it's going to be a very fat back strap other than the conventional back strap that will be looking very small. It's just for the aim of the design to make it look unique and beautiful. In our subsequent video, we'll be showing you how to create back straps, how you can take the measurement for back strap. This one is very fatter than it was. It's more of a counter like, and the purpose is just for the sake of the design that I have on ground. I'll be using an embossed material on the back part of the shoe other than using the plain material. I trust this video was helpful and you've gotten value from what we are doing here. If you have not subscribed to this channel, please just click on the subscribe button and make sure you give us a thumbs up for a job well done and share with someone. I am Peter Shalom Gebe, the aspiring footwear professor.